This might have been the best non-World Cup year ever for the Springboks. This is their second highest ever winning percentage in a non-World Cup year where they play more than 4 games. After 1998, when you know who their young breakthrough player was, who scored 4 of his 7 international tries.
Was it Johan Erasmus?
It was Johan Razi Erasmus. So him as a player got a 92% winning rate. The Springboks this year now finished the year, they played 13 games, they've come in with an 85% winning rate. They've lost 2 games and that's it, and now closed out the year, which I think has been an immensely successful innings for them.
Yeah, and those 2 games, they're hardly ones that you're going to hang your hats with. Like, it's not; those are not games that define them as a team.
They lost to a last-minute kick, and the other they could have won, but for a last-minute kick.
Yeah, and they were both against teams who were on absolute top form on that day. You know, and sometimes those happen in international rugby because it's so competitive at the moment. So that is as good a year as not quite any international team will have, because like Zimbabwe have gone unbeaten, but still.
And so I think the big theme of this autumn for the Springboks has been the managing to win games and, in the case of this Wales test, win comprehensively without being absolutely on fire. I thought they were good at the weekend. They were at like a 7 out of 10 maybe, you know, and yet they almost scored 50 points. They won very comprehensively against Wales. It's maybe their 3rd or 4th biggest win in Cardiff ever, and that is just their standard now, you know?
What they consider a 10 is much higher than what everybody else considers a 10, you know. That a lot of Springboks have come away from the last couple of weeks and said the Scotland and Wales games, we've played quite poorly in those, but still come away with 40-odd point wins, you know, where they've scored 4+ tries.
I think what is a 10 for the Springboks now is sort of that second half against Argentina at home when they absolutely smashed them. A good Argentina team playing really well. And it's halves like the World Cup final, like the last 20 minutes against England in the semi-final and the game against France, you know, after the first 20-odd minutes.
Yeah.
And it is performances like that where they take a world-class side and they take them apart. And a 7 out of 10 for them is taking any other side and taking them apart as they have to England, to Wales and to Scotland over the last few weeks.
Yeah, I think the first half against Wales, there were moments where it looked like it was going to approach that 9 or that 10 when they got to a 14-0 lead very early on in the game. But you do also have to credit Wales because they really stayed in the fight. It's a really difficult game, but also the easiest game to get yourself up for in a way.
Absolutely,
when everything couldn't go worse in a way. It's a free hit.
Yeah.
You know, you get to just go, you know what, lads, we're playing against the best team in the world, one of the best teams of all time. Let's just enjoy ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, and I really love that Wales had the approach of who's going to put a shot on Etzebeth. Who's going to put a shot on Khaleesi? And, you know, Josh Hathaway putting that massive shot on Khaleesi and dumping him into touch. You know, that's something that a player like him should never get to do in their lifetime, and he probably never will again, as great a career as he's probably going to have. You know, like, an opportunity like that is incredible. You know, it's like, we're playing against Cheslin Colby. Who's going to put a huge hit on him? And I love that.
The Springboks 2 starting locks had more caps than the entire Welsh starting 15 put together.
Yeah.
Right? That's the level we're talking at. The Welsh starting number 12 to number 15 had a total of 11 caps between them going into the game. Like, this was an inexperienced Wales team. This wasn't Wales' strongest team they could possibly put out. Obviously, you know, there's a bit of rotation. There's a few injuries in there, like Adam Beard and Aaron Wainwright and so on, were either injured or exhausted and so rested. But I think they gave a really good account for themselves, and we'll get onto Wales in a bit.
Yeah.
But I think the Springboks were pretty relentless, and they just showed what a challenge they are to face, you know? There is no opposition who goes, you know what? Decent fixture this weekend, it's only the Springboks. Even if you are a team like Ireland or New Zealand or at points France, who have had a period over the last 4 years where you are ostensibly better than the Springboks, they're always the most physically demanding game to play. You always dread playing them.
As you say, it's the most physically taxing on the body. Because that's just, A, their style of play, and B, like, they are the biggest pack.
Yeah.
And probably the most aggressive backline that exists in world rugby at the moment. And that feeds into all areas of their game, that their set piece is better than anybody else's, you know, and that was where Wales really struggled at the most at the weekend. You know, like, from a Welsh perspective, there's a lot you pick out and go, well, they didn't help themselves with the discipline, right? Yeah. Discipline was a big thing. Well, it's so hard playing against the Springboks, like, because of their attacking style of play and everything. It's even harder when you're having to defend mauls against those boys all day, you know? Yeah. And scrum penalties, you can't help as much because sometimes you're just getting dominated and you get penalised for not being as strong as your opposite man. And like Thomas Dutoy playing on the loose head.
That scrum went really well against Fiji and Australia, you know? And you put them in against South Africa, who don't even have their strongest starting props out, and they're getting demolished every single scrum. That's a sheer strength and depth of this Bok team.
Yeah, like Thomas du Toit is probably their third or fourth choice. Yeah. In fact, probably almost definitely fourth, including Stephen Kitsoff, who's been injured all year, and playing on the opposite side of the scrum to what he usually does. And he has given poor old Archie Griffin the toughest day of his rugby career right there.
Yeah.
Because it's not only a world-class technical scrummager, he's an immensely strong bloke. He plays with Archie Griffin at Bath, so almost definitely knows all of his strengths and his frailties.
All the little tricks he does to get on top.
And completely bullied him there. Yeah. And I really felt for Archie Griffin getting pulled off before half-time because he's a really hard-working player, and I think he's done really well in his opening few caps, which is quite difficult as a tight head prop. Yeah. It's a really hard position to establish yourself in international rugby, especially against the oppositions he's played against. But yeah, that is the hardest test he will play in his life. And you know what? I hope he's just taken it on the chin and just gone, next time I'll do better.
Absolutely.
You know? Which he will. He will. He's a great player with a bright future.
However, there's one other interesting wrinkle about this test, right? Which is, do you want a stat you might not expect?
Go on.
This was the lowest percentage of the Springboks carries that crossed the gain line of the entire year, of all 13 tests, right? And so I think a lot of credit has to go to the Welsh defence. So it's something that I think is being talked about because Wales let in a lot of tries. People keep saying the defence isn't working. What they've got in Mike Forshaw, their defence coach, is a defence coach like Sean Edwards or like, Jacques Nienaber, who has a set system that he runs and he deploys, right? And this system uses an awful lot of double tackles. So you put two players into every tackle, you have to slow the ball down, hit them immediately, stop momentum instantly, right? And this really worked against the Springboks. They crossed the gain line on 67% of their carries against Scotland, and on 63% against England. It was down to 58% against Wales. Against the All Blacks, it was 67 again. Like, it's generally in the high 60s for the Springboks. England seemed like a miracle worker. They got it down to the low 60s. Wales got it into the 50s, which is almost unheard of for the Springbok team. However, what this does lead to is it's essentially a real gamble, right? Because twofold. One, you're asking your team to essentially make twice as many tackles because you're putting two men into every single tackle, pretty much. So essentially doubling your tackle count. Most tackles count for two. However, it's also not only adding up to that fatigue in the second half, which we did see kick in an awful lot. There's another downside as well, and we see both in the lead up to the try scored by Apalele Farsi. So Wales kick long, and Farsi has plenty of time to launch counter-attack, just carries it in from deep, and the Springboks instantly set up to play a kind of 11 pattern, as they call it, where you go one phase, one direction, and then back the way you came. And this leads to Wales being disproportionately split because they want two men to go into every tackle, right? So when the Springboks have most of the players on this side, it means Wales have to put twice as many numbers in because they want to make those double shots. So that means when the Springboks then go back to the blind side, they're caught narrow. Ellis Bevan's caught watching two men. He initially goes for Khaleesi, then tries to go for Aronsa, who darts right through and makes the break, right? This is twofold. One, Wales are exhausted by this point. It's the second half. They've been making these double tackles all the time, leading to them not wrapping someone round to that side quickly enough. And two, it means you've got to double up in tackles, right? So there is going to be space on those sides. And that leads to this break, which then, he links up with Farsi, who scores in the corner. Yeah.
And it's a very similar trend to a try scored by who I thought was the best player on the pitch.
Agreed.
Mostert! It starts with Wales going for a two-phase kick play that they kick off Ellis Bevan and they send Josh Hathaway after this. And also, not just Hathaway, they also send Tane Plumtree to kind of go as that overshoot style chaser where in case there's a deflection, as a tall player and B, a fast player, if a freak incident happens, he probably can run something in or get to the 22 or whatever. Aronsa ends up taking the ball, beats a couple of defenders and takes it in. Really powerful carry by Aronsa from the counter-attack. But Wales end up having, Ellis Bevan ends up covering the blind side, which is fair enough. And once again, they go for that kind of double tackle, and both Jack Morgan and Jim Botham, the two flankers for Wales, contest this breakdown. We talked a lot about Tony Brown's Springbok attack and how he's evolved it. And here, this is a trend that is, I think it was sort of popularised by Italy in the Six Nations a lot, and the Springboks do a really good variation on it here, where whenever they have excess forwards that aren't being used in a breakdown, for example, in sort of like a 1-3-3-1, Italy often use a 2-4-2 structure, the Springboks have 5 players that are potential carriers here. Granted, Etzebet's probably not really an option, but they turn this 3 into a 4. So there are 2 potential head carriers here, which means there are 2 boots that Jordan Hendrickson could potentially slide into here. They end up skipping Mostert and going to Visa. Now, the knock-on effect of both flankers contesting this breakdown means the furthest out forward here is Nicky Smith for Wales, which at this moment in time isn't a problem because he's got both centres and a winger outside him, so that's completely fine. Smith can cover this ground, and he's only got Will Colo opposite him. He's probably all right covering that space. Will Colo runs a really realistic line, which is quite nice, and that ties in Nicky Smith a little bit, but more importantly, it just takes the sting out of Max Llewellyn's line speed a little bit, which means that he's a bit hesitant and they can't then opt for a drift defence to push out to the wing. And all they then need to do is take care of Ben Thomas on the outside. And Apulele Fassi runs a phenomenal line to just completely take him out of the game. He turns his shoulders inwards, he buys this all ends up, and they're just attacking against Rio Dyer. They attack down Dyer's wing. Dyer and Murray do pretty well to stop this opportunity, but if you look at this reverse angle, Mostert is the whole time watching Nicky Smith. He's watching Nicky Smith's body language. Where is he facing? Where is he running towards? Nicky Smith is, of course, backtracking. He's got his back to Mostert, and Mostert can just go, great, well, there's going to be a space around him somewhere. And beats him into that space, times his run perfectly on that little flood line.
It's brilliant.
And it's a brilliant try.
The way he accelerates onto the ball, the way he knows where it's coming, the way he can scan, that is a line that a decade ago you'd look at being run by a fullback or a centre. And instead, him as a second row is picking those off and lining those up brilliantly. And we think of him for the grunt and the things he did around the other, the rest of the pitch for the other 79 minutes. But in 60 seconds there, he showed what a complete rugby player he is.
Yeah, 100%. He was the best player in the park for me. I think that, as you say, is that a Tony Brown thing? I don't know. Maybe it's just a these being world-class rugby players thing. That they can all look up and see that.
But you look at what Tony Brown has done with Diolande, right? Diolande could always do that. He could always play as a distributor. It was always an option, a part of his game. Just no one looked at him and went, why aren't we doing this, And a big part of what Tony Brown's done is getting players like that into these new positions, right? And so we look at this example here. The Springboks have got a bit of momentum. They've got into the 22. They've played a phase-off first phase. Visa's crashed it up. And again, knowing Wales like to put lots of numbers in one line on the open side or to make those double tackles, they go down the blind side. And this is a really smart little moment here. So first up, we have Elric Lowe. So Wales look up here, right, and they see they've got Elric Lowe as the first man, they've got Grobler on the touchline, and they go, this is a forward pod of 3. The Springboks are just set here. So that's what we're going to do. If they go this way, it would be a simple crash-up job, and all they have to do is number up and bam, they're sorted. Except, in the middle of that too, they have Cheslin Colby, and Colby is slightly ahead of the other two to act as a distributor. So Colby, who had for his standards, really quiet game, but they hit him, and he works as a kind of secondary fly half playmaker on this side. So he has either got the dart himself, and Ellis Bevan goes, oh, shit, this is Cheslin Colby. He's going to do a side and beat all of us and score the try of the season.
Think what happened against England last week, and we used this exact
He's got that going through his head, right? And then you've got the guy on the inside, Plumtree, is thinking, oh, Elric Lowe, played against him countless times, knows what a threat he is, and he's going, okay, I've got to watch for this guy. And it leads to Wales essentially shooting in on these two and opening the space for Grobler to burst down the wing. South Africa then managed to set up, and look the way they instantly get into position, and they're instantly playing so flat and so quick, and the forwards are taking the ball at pace. And it's such a simple thing, but it really, really stands out once you get onto looking at Wales, right? This eventually leads to Farsis try this for a brilliant tackle by halfway. But yeah, it just shows what a danger the Springbok team are for using players like Colby and going, not just, he's quick, so let's put him on the wing where you get the most space, but no, he's also an intelligent rugby player. So let's get him in situations where he can use that, where he can distribute, where he can bring people in. And also, every defender in the world is terrified of playing against him.
Yeah.
You
think about the other week we were on about Dupont and against the All Blacks, and the fact that he was a little bit quieter, but that's still a good thing, Like, it's the exact same with Colby here, because he has the bullshit factor. He can get the ball and just make a break because he's Cheslin Colby, And the amount of times that just his presence being there held a defender, and that makes a difference for the rest of the team. It increases the Springboks' opportunity to win the game and score more tries.
I quite recently spoke to an international rugby player who shall remain nameless, who said that Colby and players like him are the players they dread playing against most, because if you come up against someone like Etzebeth or like a massive carry, an Ardy Surveyor type, and they bump you off, then people will watch and go, well, there's nothing you can do about it, right? Whereas you're just as likely to miss a tackle on Colby, and people go, oh, you look like an idiot, don't you?
Yeah.
And that also motivates and sits in your head, Every player on this pitch for Wales is thinking, God, I don't want to be opposite Colby, I don't want to be opposite Aronson, And probably to a third degree going, I don't want to be opposite Farsi particularly, but I'll take it if the other option is Colby. It leads to a brilliant situation for South Africa. However, I want to then contrast it to a Wales attack. And obviously it's a different situation, but same set-piece launch pad. So they get a decent scrum. Wales only won 3 of their 6 own scrums in this game. This is one of the ones that goes best for them. They managed to launch off it. They just hit a simple play to Josh halfway on the touchline. Again, South Africa wrapping around. They managed to take him. They get him to ground. But Wales have made 15, 20 metres off this scrum. And they're in the ascendancy. The forward set up. However, look how deep they are. There's no need for them to be set this deep. And I think this is a huge part of, we talk about the coach needs to change for Wales or whether they do or not, whether tactics are wrong. I think Wales' tactics are fine, but the issue is the actual setup and structures, right? So 2 phases in a row here, Wales get caught well behind the gain line. So first phase, Griffin carries, he's behind the gain line, so Wales get caught behind the gain line, right? But he does a pretty decent carry. The next phase, Dewi Lake is some 15 metres behind the gain line, which means South Africa rush up, and he bounces off 3 players and makes what would be a brilliant dominant carry, but he just about gets up to the initial gain line, having made a brilliant carry on his own. And you compare that to the previous example, right? Where Etzebeth makes that first carry and Wales fly up and double tackle him and shoot him down and they catch him incredibly well. Like, this is not one of Etzebeth's finest carries, but he makes it up the same place in relation to the gain line as Lake does because Wales are set up poorly. Lake also beforehand points to Costello, wanting him to take the ball instead, and he said, ends up with it himself. It's a lack of communication. It's a lack of good structures from Wales. Wales are setting way too deep here. Costello then kicks it away a phase later because they're going backwards now. But that's entirely on the setup, not the carrying options, And that's what needs to be changing for Wales is you just contrast these two. Yes, South Africa have almost man for man, with the exception of maybe Lake and Morgan, better players across the park. But also, Wales aren't giving themselves the best chance to be successful because their structure is so far behind what South Africa are doing to get the most out of the players they do have.
Yeah, and I think it is actually fair to put Wales' attack and Wales' defence up against each other here because we're now at a point where South Africa's attack is just as hard to play against as South Africa's D is.
Yeah, people talk about Wales' tactics being behind the time or Warren ball not working anymore, and I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is partly their defence requires a level of fitness that Wales don't have. Gatland post-match talked about the conditioning being poor, and I think that is the case relative to the opposition. Wales did not look fit enough to be running the defence they were running, And so we saw big stretches where they were getting on top and stopping South Africa. However, there were moments, and it wasn't just it got, the last 20 minutes traditionally as we talk about and they're tired. It was individually that they'd have a big stretch of defending and then something like the Mostert try would come, right? Because players aren't getting into position quickly enough because they're knackered from 10 minutes straight of defending.
Yeah.
And that happened all the way through the game. There'd be moments of knock-on effect from that happening. And then
Etzebeth try is a perfect example.
Absolutely, yeah.
They blast through that breakdown because Wales have been so under the cosh for ages, and so it just doesn't go their way.
Players aren't getting to the ruck quickly enough because they've been knackered from defending for so long.
Yeah. Also, by the way, just while we're talking about that, a quick word for Etzebeth's support line here.
Superb.
As he throws the pass, he just puts his head down. It's like a kick chase.
Yeah.
All he's thinking about is sprinting. At no point does he watch Aronson outside him. He just watches Blair Murray tracking across. And then when he knows he's tracked across, he knows, oh, good, I can look at Aronson and catch the ball
Word
now.
for him giving the pass early as well. A lot of second rowers try and take that as long as they can and then give it. But he goes, no, Aronson will get on the outside. This is better just giving it early.
All I have to do is stay in the fight now.
But yeah, this Welsh team are playing tactics that can work, but shapes that won't.
Yeah.
And that is a huge problem. And the tactics then will probably work in a World Cup where they've got time to be conditioned properly, but they're not conditioned properly. We can get into the problems of Welsh rugby. In general, if we like down the road, we've done it a bunch. I think generally this was a really encouraging performance. And the thing it reminds me of, this Wales team, the way they played, this is on paper the worst Welsh team of all time against the best South African team of all time. 30 points.
There's no shame in losing to those boys.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought they gave an account for themselves. It really felt like every player gave everything they had. And what it reminds me of is the Italy team of 2020 and 2021. Franco Smith came in as the coach and he went, okay, I'm just going to do a hard reset. And he put in entirely young kids, entirely young lads, like we've got Beezy, Lamoureux, Canone.
Menoncello
came in shortly afterwards, a year down the line. But he just reset Jacopo Trula, he entirely put in, these Fischetti, these 20, 21-year-old players. And for the first couple of years, they gave everything they had. and they weren't good enough. They were losing by 20 odd points, right? But they were having moments in games where you went, oh, but they got on top of England there. They got on top of the All Blacks there. They got on top of Wales or Scotland or Ireland for like 5 or 10 minutes at a time. And slowly they built that out into being competitive in games they were still losing, and into this year now where they were winning those games, you know? Or at least they were being in situations like the All Blacks game at the weekend where they could have won that game and they created enough moments to win that game, even if they didn't, and they didn't take enough of them.
I think a part of that does come down to the fact that eventually they had that Benetton team that went on and won the Rainbow Cup and was very competitive in the ORC and in Europe and blah, blah, blah. You know, and obviously we're not going to get too into Welsh Regional Rugby and all the stuff around that at the moment. But you're right, like they invested in those players early and eventually it did come through when they was all sort of 15 or so caps richer. Yeah. You know, that made a huge difference.
And I think this Welsh team, you give them time and they will slowly turn into that, I think. You've got a squad of players that currently aren't at the standard that they're playing at, you know. I look at Josh Hathaway at the weekend and I see someone that isn't yet ready for international rugby, but I am totally reassured by the performance that he will be one day, you know. Same with Archie Griffin. I think one day he will get there. I think Blair Murray is close. I think if Blair Murray had come into a good Welsh team, he'd probably look great. Yeah. But at the minute, he looks pretty decent in this side, you know.
Max Llewellyn, much the same. You know, he's been quite quiet throughout the autumn. Yeah, I think these guys will come good because they're
had a really good game, actually.
Yeah,
you know?
And also, like, you see how well these guys play at club level. Yeah. You can see how much potential they all have.
Absolutely.
And as you say, like, they are definitely worth investing in.
Yeah.
But it's not that they're not up to the standard. It's that the standard that they're playing at is higher than theirs. Yeah. If that makes sense. The standard is slightly trying to run away from them, you know. And yeah, you need to give them a little bit of exposure.
You need to give them time.
Like, Josh Hathaway's a really good example, right? Because he is playing in a position where he's really exposed and he will make mistakes before he becomes a top-class winger, right? It's inevitable. It's sadly just a part of it, you know? Like, you look at the try that Arendse scored where South Africa deliberately overload him. They give him 2 or 3 decisions to make in about 3 seconds by putting Colby in this boot as well as Hendrickse. And he bites in. And then Blair Murray also bites in off the back of that. And that's a totally understandable mistake to make that results in a try.
First time at home.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that, 5 minutes later, the one that you mentioned earlier, where Murray puts loads of trust in him to double job here and get onto the outside if South Africa keep this in hand, Murray is just about tight enough that he knows he can still get to Arendse on the chip kick. He does, Arendse bats it back inside, Murray stays on his feet, Hathaway does phenomenally well to get here to Farsi. The two of them hold him up, phenomenal bit of defence by the pair of them.
Yeah, and that shows what experience at this level means, you know. Yeah. One game like that is worth 15, 20 games at club level, you know, that he could play. And he will learn so much from that. The entire team will. And Sia Khaleesi made the point after the game on the UK broadcast that this Welsh team reminds him a lot of the team he first came through in the Springboks. You know, he was played in the 2015 World Cup. But that 2016, 17, early 2018 team before Rassie came in, where they had the players, and you know that now. But at the time, people were going, well, are they good enough? Are they enough? Is this the worst Springbok team we've ever had? Because they were in world rankings terms and lost to Italy for the first time ever, and they had that famous 57-0 loss. And then Rassie comes in, they have the right coach, they have the right emphasis, and they get a few wins in a row, and they turn into double world champions. And that didn't happen overnight. They turned from those players eating shit for a few years and learning international rugby. And I'm not saying Wales are going to be double world champions, but I think this team's ceiling is much, much higher than it looks. However, the interesting thing about both that Italy team and that South Africa team is they changed coach multiple times, right? So Italy changed coach twice because they recognised very smartly they needed one guy to see through bringing in this group of players. They needed another guy to teach them to play a different style of rugby. And now they needed a different third coach in Quesada to teach them to play more mature rugby, you know, and start winning games rather than just being competitive. And they've made bold decisions before it seemed like the right choice, you know? After the World Cup, firing Crowley probably did seem like the right thing. But before it didn't. Yeah. And bringing in Quesada was a really smart decision because they saw that decline coming. And the WU needs to be bold and make some of those choices, you know? And they probably need to change coaches as South Africa did, as Italy did, building into teams like they have today.
We'll see what happens with Wales, you know. As I say, I think after a game like that, it's important to just talk about the on-field stuff because it was a great performance by Wales. It was a very good performance by Wales. It's difficult to call it great when that's the scoreline kind of thing. Yeah. But they're playing against, one of the best oppositions of all time. As I say, there's no harm in going down heavily to those boys. Yeah. When they stood up, they were really physical. Derry Lake left everything out there. Jack Morgan in particular.
Unbelievable effort.
28 tackles, that's just a phenomenal effort.
Yeah, he was absolutely unbelievable. And yeah, South Africa, bring down the curtain another year. We're going to do, I think, a wrap-up on... We're going to try and go for every Tier 1 nation, potentially. But we'll definitely look at the Springboks and how their 2024 has been, because I think it has been a brilliant year for them.
Yeah. Well, it's quite hard to argue with that, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, you can't say like, I don't know, they've been pretty mediocre.
They lost to Argentina. They lost 2 games by like 2 points each.
Yeah.
It's outrageous.
Yeah. The thing is, that's probably the way
Look,
that
they didn't
Rossi
win a
will
World...
look at that.
South Africa didn't win a World Cup this year, and by their standards, that's terrible. So, the second best year in their history, non-World Cup years. The only way this team can probably get better now is by bringing in that promising youngster that worked so well in 1998. Do you think they could drop in the player, Rassie Erasmus, and just see how it goes?
I thought you were going to say Rabs Maxwane then. No, yeah.
No,
maybe
that's
they
actually
would.
better, yeah.
Yeah, I reckon.
I think that's what they need. They're missing Maxwane.
Yeah, but on a real, if next year they did pick Rassie Erasmus on the back row for them, I think they'd still be dominant.
If they picked Ralph Maxwane in the back row, they'd probably still be dominant.
Yeah, they would.
Yeah.
But
look, if Maxwane had played their 13 games this year, they would have won 14 of them. That's all I'm saying.
You heard it here first.
Psst, if you like that, if you want more of that, there's loads around the channel, but there's also a second channel called More Switch Rugby, where we're going to be reviewing all the autumn games individually. We've got Italy, New Zealand coming up, we've got a wrap-up, we've got all sorts. We did a look at the Player of the Year the other day, all the other games. Have a look around. We'll see you very soon for more Rugby Moments of the Year coming up very soon. That's very exciting.